Erase. Must be a math class. Okay, gang. It's almost 5 after. The other folks will be moseying on in here. What I wanted to do is I wanted to reiterate and reclarify the nature of the thesis that I want you to be writing in the next 10 days or so. Toby sent you an email of this here earlier this morning. We sort of hammered away at it, but the bottom line is this, that what I want you to, this is a thesis, as distinct from just a normal essay. It's a thesis. I want you to, number one, tell me what you believe the major public policy crisis is going to be that is going to be confronting our whole human family in the 21st century. What is the major public policy problem going to be? Number two, I want you to explain to me briefly why you believe that's the major public policy problem that's going to be confronting us all during your lifetimes. Thirdly, I want you to identify what you think the constitutional issues are that will be presented to us as a result of this major public policy problem. If, for example, I've given you a half a dozen different potential public policy problems to choose from, and you can choose another one different than that if you want to. But I've identified, for example, the global climate change crisis. Secondly, the rise of a national security state here in the United States. Then a bunch of others. What are the other ones that I identified there?
International nation-state competition.
Oh yeah, China, the confrontation between China and the United States that might result in major military economic conflict. Yeah.
The transnational corporate capitalist economic system.
Yeah, the saying that the transnational corporate capitalist system running to its logical consequences and basically collapsing, like it did in 1929. Do you think that is the kind of major threatening, major public policy crisis? And
the two other ones, a major terrorist or nuclear event,
yeah,
conflict
yeah, okay. So yeah, another one, the fourth one is a potential major terrorist attack perhaps even nuclear in its nature. And you can see some of the kind of logical constitutional implications if there's the detonation of a nuclear device in the United States and the administration coming in and asserting a state of martial law or a nuclear emergency of some kind, in suspending constitutional rights and establishing martial law or something in that area. There, you can see some of these issues become immediately obvious to you. And there was another one that I put in there as a matter of reality, of suggesting that if in fact there were to be contact established with an extraterrestrial civilization, and this were to undermine in some really profound and fundamental way the kind of philosophical beliefs or theological beliefs of our people, what type of consequences that might have for civil disruption, etc. But you can see that what I'm doing is I'm setting forth a number of examples that would tend toward civil disruption and the potential breakdown of law in the attempt on the part of an administration to assert some sort of extraordinary executive power or authority to suspend rights, etc. Now, what I've done is I've said that I want you to identify what you think the constitutional issues are that would be generated by the manifestation of that particular public policy problem. And then fourthly, I want you to discuss in the thesis what your personal opinion is about the potential value or usefulness of the natural law theory as a resource for fueling the constitutional arguments that would have to be made in order to try to redress this major crisis. And if you don't believe that they're very persuasive or effective, to state why, and therefore what you think might be sufficient to support a constitutional argument as to what responses need to be taken to address the public policy problem that you've identified. And then what I want you to do is, finally, and very importantly, I want you to propose what you believe the kind of project or campaign ought to be to try to address and resolve that particular public policy crisis constitutionally, without having to go outside the protections of our Constitution. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to think as extensively as you can about how aggressive a program you think might be necessary in order to actually redress this particular policy problem, but to do so undertaking actions within the Constitution itself. And ideally without the need to resort to the use of ad hominem violence. So that's the task in front of you. Now you might say, holy mackerel, that's a pretty gargantuan task, and it's not as narrow and focused as others that we've been asked to write about in the past in the other courses. But what I want to do is I want to actually elicit your most aggressive thinking about what's coming and what can be done about it, what will need to be done about it, and how that relates to the Constitution, and what kind of threats to the Constitution such a crisis like that might pose, and how we as a cadre made up of the members of the millennial generation, your generation, and my generation, the idealist baby boomer generation, can actually work together to solve this while still respecting the full array of the Constitution. Okay, so that's the task in front of us, and this is a 15-page essay. It's not an 8-page essay with 5 pages of notes. It's the body of your essay or your thesis. I want to be the 15 pages. I want you to feel expansive about this, not airy and puffed up, but thorough in this. And then you can attach your footnotes to that. Okay. Now, what I've promised to do is in the few periods that we have together here, I want to be able to elucidate for you an example of what my thesis is and how we would go about addressing these factors that you're going to be asked to address in your thesis. And as I started out last week to explain to you that my principal thesis is that there exists right at this moment, and there has existed ever since the beginning of modern Western civilization, there has existed an oligarchical elite who secretly rule from the shadows and actually superimpose their will upon the public governing structures of the community. And through that process of manipulating and superimposing their desires on the public governing structures of the community, they superimpose their positions and their will over the other 99.9% of all of us in Western culture. And that my thesis is that this element within Western civilization, working through the unique business model of the transnational corporate capitalist entity, are on the very brink of destroying the environment, the fundamentals of our environment on the planet. And they are threatening to generate massive global climate change that is going to massively disrupt the economy and the social life of you in your generation. And that I believe, secondly, that this group is going to be making use of, rolling into place, the protocols and procedures of a major national security state here in the United States. And that while this national security state may well have been rolled into position originally for more narrow purposes, but always to be available to this shadow government, to be superimposed upon the normal constitutional order of things in order to preserve and protect their privileges. And that this set of protocols and programs of a national security state nature that have been put into place beginning as early as the National Security Act of 1947 and have been buttressed by certain provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act, all the way from 2006 to 2012, such as those that I'll be touching upon in the next two lectures, that there are provisions such as Section 1021 and 1022 of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which explicitly authorize the United States military to take into custody and hold indeterminately any American citizen who the executive branch has deemed to be providing significant support to any organization, not only that was involved in the events of 9/11, but any other organization that is engaged in hostilities toward the United States or any of our allies, or lending support to any organization that is associated with such an organization, or lending support, significant support, to any individual person who is associated with any group that is associated with such a group. And that I view such a system authorized by the United States Congress to be totally unconstitutional and entitled to absolutely no obedience or enforcement on the part of any American citizen. In fact, we have an obligation to, in fact, oppose such an operation and to see to it that it is not allowed to be put into effect in this country, no matter what ends we need to resort to in order to make sure that that is done, so long as we respect and observe the Constitution of our United States, and we avoid resorting to the use of ad hominem violence, and that is the use of violence against another person to attempt to inflict serious bodily injury upon them. So those are the two primary aspects of the thesis. One is the fact that there exists this group and that it is through the economic model of the corporation is involved in imposing this global climate change upon us. And the fact is that they are going to be resorting to the use of the tools of the national security state to stop us from engaging in the type of radical action that will be necessary to stop the consequences of the global climate change. Now, I'm pointing out that this group has existed since the beginning. There's been this element within the cultures of Western civilization who have existed in the shadows, who have in fact superimposed their will secretly on the public instrumentalities of the community. So this is not new. that this has existed ever since the ancient Greece and ancient Rome and all of the different feudal institutions that we've had, and that therefore this existed, as I pointed out earlier in our lectures, this has existed since the very beginning of our country. That there were these elements around Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists who in fact did not agree with the democratic dimensions of our constitutional institutions, that they opposed them, that they wanted to have an elite governance system continuing with a certain royalist elite that were actually enabled to make the decisions and to not allow the great unwashed, the paysans, to actually participate in the decision-making processes. And so they've been in existence since the founding of our country. But I want to make it clear that I do not believe that these groups originated with the founding of our country, that they existed before, because we know that it was this kind of alliance between this royalist, elitist group of families and the ecclesial authorities of the Roman Catholic Church and later the Church of England that actually were so repressive to the people of Europe that caused the pilgrims to leave and to come here to North America to set up the colonies. So we know all of that. That's kind of history 101 that we have. But I want to make it clear that that kind of royalist, elitist, and ecclesial elite have always viewed themselves as being authorized to secretly govern. Now, lest you believe that the conclusion on my part within this thesis that I'm asserting is some sort of a paranoid delusion on my part, I want to provide for you a number of quotations. And the advantage is that we have this recorded, so you don't have to write like mad to take verbatim notes on all these quotes, but I want to set forth for you a number of quotations from Franklin Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, major Democratic Party presidents, who, based upon their direct experience with such a group, have tried to make it obvious to us that this is true. And he said, and here's a statement. This starts with a statement that was made to the New York State Democratic Convention by Franklin Roosevelt on September 29th of 1936. He said, "The task on our part is simple, and it is twofold. First, as a simple matter of patriotism, it is our obligation to separate false issues from the real issues. And secondly, that without rancor, with facts to clarify the real problems that are presented to the American people. There will be many false issues that are going to be tendered. Those desperate in their mood, angry in their failure, cunning in their purpose. There is a specific group that will seek, in this case, to make communism, and we could say in our time periods, the issue of terrorism, that they will seek to make terrorism an issue in the major elections. The principal issue in our elections is not communism, for there is no controversy between our two main political parties on this issue." And he says, and then Woodrow Wilson said in 1912, during his campaign against William Howard Taft, he said in a book that he published called The New Freedom, he said at page 36, and I won't keep citing the pages to you on this, but they're available for you. "An invisible empire has been set up above all of the forms of our democratic government. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had certain men's views confided to me in private. Some of the brightest men in the United States in the field of commerce, in manufacture, and in public government are afraid of something, of someone. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so watchful, so interlocked, and so complete and pervasive that they had better not speak about this group unless they speak under their breath when they discuss them. He goes on to say, our government has been for a number of years under the control of the heads of a great alliance among the owners of corporations who have very specific interests. Our government has not controlled these interests. It has submitted itself to their control. The laws of our country no longer prevent these strong from crushing the interests of the weak, so the strong dominate both the industry and the economic and political life of our country. The old political formulas no longer fit the present problem. They read now like documents taken out of some forgotten age. We have not adjusted our laws to confront the facts of this new political and economic order. Our middle class is being more and more squeezed out by the processes which we have been taught to call the process for personal prosperity. Its members are sharing only a small portion of the prosperity which they originate. But no nation can long afford to have its prosperity originated only by such a small controlling class. Thus, there are cities in which not the interests of the public, but the interests of this specially privileged, selfish group of men are being served instead, where private contracts take precedent over the public interest. And this is not only in the big cities, but is growingly true all throughout the Union. Our people are coming to feel that they no longer have any control over our own affairs. We vote, and we are offered the platforms which they want. And we are all allowed to vote only for the men who stand on those platforms. But in return, we get virtually nothing. We now know that the machines of both of our major political parties are subsidized by these same people, and therefore it is useless to turn to either one of them to seek directions. Now those were all statements that were made by Woodrow Wilson in 1912 in his book called The New Freedom. And Franklin Roosevelt, running for the presidency and winning the presidency in 1932, and then moving into place a number of reforms through 1934, said this. This is from his State of the Union speech that he made to Congress on April 29th of 1938. He said, referring to the rise of fascism in Europe at the time, he said, the unhappy events that we are now witnessing abroad have retaught us two simple but very important truths about the liberty of a democratic people. The first is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of a private power to such a point that it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. This, in essence, is fascism. The ownership of our government by a private group of individuals and corporations or any other private controlling power is what the problem is. The second truth is that our liberty in a democracy is not safe if the economic system that has been adopted by the nation's business community does not provide adequate employment and distribute goods and services in such a manner as to sustain an acceptable standard of living for all. And we have long known that heedless self-interest is bad morals. Now we know that it is bad economics as well. And then he said in his book that he wrote in 1934 called Looking Forward, he said, more striking still, if this process of the concentration of wealth and power goes on at its present rate, this was in 1934 he said this, by the end of this century, we shall have all American industry and finance controlled by less than a dozen major corporations, which will be owned and run by less than 100 men. Putting it plainly, we are on the course and are still continuing to steer the course toward economic and political oligarchy, if we are not there already, he said. And then in a private letter that he wrote to Colonel Edward Mandell House, which is published in his public letters, the public letters of Franklin Roosevelt, and I've got the page numbers here for you. His private letter, he said, "The actual truth of this matter is, as both you and I know, Colonel, that a specific financial element in the larger cities has owned our United States government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. Our country is now going through a repetition of Andrew Jackson's fight with the central bank. Only now it is on a far bigger and broader scale." And what he was referring to was that between 1929 and 1939, Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party mounted a major opposition to the rechartering of a central bank on the part of the United States that was being had been proposed by Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, that we talked about briefly earlier. And they were saying that the grounds on which the Jacksonian Democrats opposed the rechartering of a central bank was that it granted that on the ground that the chartering of such a bank would confer certain economic privileges on the members of a specific financial elite, violating a fundamental principle of our American Constitution that requires the promotion of social equality. The Jacksonian Democrats viewed a central bank to be an illegitimate and unconstitutional corporation, the chartering of which violates the fundamental principles of federalism by empowering the central government and its urban and industrial proponents at the expense of the agricultural and rural people. The National Republican Party that controlled Congress had passed the rechartering law, and it was vetoed by Andrew Jackson, saying that it was pitting the farmers, the mechanics, the laborers, and the common people against the moneyed interests of our country. And it was on that ground that Andrew Jackson defeated Henry Clay in the national presidential election of 1832, when Henry Clay and the Republicans were financially supported by Henry Biddle, or Nicholas Biddle, who was the president of the central bank, and his cronies. And in an address that Franklin Roosevelt gave in Madison Square Garden on October 31st of 1936, he said, "We have had to struggle with the old enemies of peace, the owners of business and financial monopolies, financial speculators, and the men who are in charge of the reckless banking practices, and those who engage in war profiteering. They have begun to consider our government to be a mere appendage of their own business affairs. We must realize that our government, being run by the interests of these organized wealthy, is just as dangerous as our government being run by organized crime. Never before in all of our history have their forces been so united as they stand today. There is among us today just such a concentration of private corporate power without equal in our history, and it is growing ever stronger. And I welcome their open hatred of me," said Roosevelt. And I'll touch on in a moment the fact that this group that he's talking about actually attempted to stage a military coup against him in 1934. Yes?
Can you repeat who wrote the book before?
It's Franklin Roosevelt.
Still?
Franklin Roosevelt, yes. And when I make reference to a specific speech that he gave, it's not coming from his book Looking Forward, it's a specific speech that he gave. He says, and he continues on in this address that he gave in Madison Square Garden on October 31st of 1936, this concentration of corporate power and wealth is seriously impairing the effectiveness of our economic system of private enterprise, so as to be able to provide adequate employment opportunities for labor and small businesses. It is, in short, imposing an economy, it is impairing our economy from being able to assure a more equitable distribution of the income and earnings of our people among the people of our nation. And he then delivered a speech in 1936 to the Democratic National Convention in which he said the following: "It was entirely natural and to be expected that the privileged princes of this new corporate economic dynasty, thirsting for their power and profit, would reach out to seek control over our government itself. They have created a new despotism and have wrapped it in the robes of legal sanctions. In their service, these new mercenaries have sought to regiment our people, our labors, and our property. And as a result, the average man once more confronts the same adversary that was confronted by the Minutemen." This is in their revolt against the Royalist elite in England that were superimposing their economic interests on the colonies. He says, the hours that any men and women now work, the wages that they receive, the conditions in which they must be compelled to work, have all passed out from under the control of the people and are now being imposed by this new financial and industrial dictatorship. The private savings of the average family, the small amount of capital that has been generated by the small business person, the investments set aside by men and women for their old age, other people's money, has now been transformed into the tools by which the membership of this new economic royalty have now dug themselves in. Those who till the soil are no longer the ones who reap the rewards which are their right. The small measure of their gains are now decreed by men in distant cities. Throughout our nation, the opportunity of the small businessman is limited by a growing set of corporate monopolies. Individual initiative is being crushed in the cogs of this great corporate machine. The field, once opened and free for small business, has grown more and more restricted. Private enterprise has now become privileged enterprise, no longer free enterprise. For most of us now, the political equality that we once believed that we had finally secured by the passage of our Constitution has become meaningless in the face of this new economic inequality. A very small group of extremely wealthy and powerful men have now concentrated into their own hands almost the complete control over other people's money and property, other people's labor, other people's lives. For too many of us, our lives are no longer truly free, and our liberty is no longer real. For we are no longer able to truly pursue our own happiness. In the face of economic tyranny such as this, our American people can appeal only to the organized power of their government, which we have created to protect us. The great economic collapse of 1929, and we might also refer to the threatened economic collapse of 2008 that was threatened by these major financial circles and banks and businessmen upon learning that Obama was going to be elected president. The great economic collapse of 1929 showed up this economic despotism for what it really is. The election of 1932 was the people's mandate to end this economic despotism. Pursuant to this mandate, we are now bringing this to an end. The economic royalists complain that we are seeking to overthrow sacred American institutions. What they are really complaining about is that we are seeking to break up their economic and political power over our nation. Our allegiance to the very institutions of our American Constitution requires that we overthrow this kind of financial power. It is in vain that they seek to hide behind our American flag and our Constitution. In their blindness, they forget what our flag and our Constitution actually stand for. Now, as always, they stand for democracy, not tyranny, freedom, not subjugation, and against any form of dictatorship, whether it be the mob rule or the dictatorship of the overprivileged few. We as presidents may err and do make mistakes, but as the poet Dante says, divine justice weighs the sins of the cold-blooded and those of the warm-hearted on a different set of scales. Better the occasional fault of a government that lives and abides in a spirit of charity than the consistent and intentional omissions of a government frozen in the ice of the indifference of the rich and powerful. The history of the past half-century, that is, he's referring to between 1880 and 1932, in our country, has in large measure been the history of a comparatively small number of financial titans whose methods of accumulating wealth and power were scrutinized with too little care, and who therefore became honored only in proportion to the degree to which their efforts produced financial results, irrespective of the means which they employed. And in his 8th State of the Union address on January 9th of 1941, he said, this is Roosevelt again, we must especially beware of that same small group of selfish men who would clip the wings of our American eagle in order to feather their own private financial nest. To us there has come this time, in the midst of swift-moving happenings, to pause for a moment and to take stock, to recall what our unique place in history has been, and to rediscover what we are and what we can still become. For if we do not do this, we risk all of the attendant perils of our inaction. The hopes of this republic cannot tolerate either undeserved poverty or unrestrained self-serving wealth. In his first inaugural address on March 4th of 1933, Roosevelt said, "The money changers must be driven from their high seats in the temple of our Western civilization, so we can restore this temple to the ancient truths. The measure of this restoration is to be found in the extent to which we identify and apply the social values of our civilization that are more noble than the mere personal pursuit of private monetary profit. It seems to me to be plain that no business corporation which depends for its existence on paying less than a true living wage to its workers has any right to be allowed to continue to exist in this country. And by a living wage, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean a wage that allows one a decent form of living." And he made that statement upon his signing on June 16th of 1933 of the National Industrial Recovery Act. And then he went on to say, "The measure of our economic progress is not to be measured by adding more and more to the abundance of those who already have so much. It is to be measured instead by whether we provide enough to those who have too little." And in his second State of the Union address on January 4th of 1935, he said, "We find today our population suffering from old inequalities that have been little changed by mere sporadic efforts at remedies. In spite of all of our talk and all of our efforts, we have not yet weeded out these overprivileged, and we have not effectively lifted up all of our underprivileged. Each of these manifestations of injustice retard our collective national happiness. No wise man has any intention of destroying the human profit motive. But by profit motive, we mean the right to work, the right to earn a decent livelihood for ourselves and for our families. We have, however, a clear mandate from the people that America must not forswear the concept of the acquisition of great wealth, which through excessive profit creates undue private power over our private affairs, and to our misfortune, over our public affairs as well. In building toward this end, we must not destroy healthy personal ambition, nor do we seek to divide all of our wealth into equal shares for all. We will continue to recognize the greater ability of some to earn more than others. However, we must not acknowledge that the simple ambition on the part of an individual to obtain for himself and for his family a proper degree of security, a reasonable degree of leisure, and a decent living throughout his life to be the same as, or to be allowed to be supplanted by, the raw appetite to acquire great personal wealth and therefore great personal power. And he said in his second State of the Union address, the public work that is needed by our nation covers a wide field. It includes the clearance and reconstruction of the slums at the heart of our cities, which for various reasons have not been and will never be undertaken by private investment. In the construction of rural housing of several different kinds, where again private investment is unable and unwilling to function. In the provision of rural electrification for our people. In the reforestation of the great watersheds of our nation. In an intensified program to prevent soil erosion and to replenish our depleted soils so as to reclaim the blighted areas. In building and improving our existing road systems. In the elimination of railroad grade crossings. In the extension and enlargement of the successful working of our Civilian Conservation Corps and the many other public projects of our nation, which we cannot afford to neglect any longer. And he goes on to criticize the federal tax system for not being adequately progressive, not taking away enough of the excess wealth of the owners of the corporations and to distribute it to the public interest. And he said on the evening before his signing of the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, he said, "Do not let any calamity-howling corporate executive who earns an income of $1,000 a day, who has been turning his employees over to the government relief rolls in order to preserve his corporation's undistributed cash reserves, tell you, using his stockholders' money to pay for the postage of his personal opinion, tell you that a wage of $11 a week is going to have a disastrous effect upon American industry. We in America believe in individual initiative and private enterprise, as well as in the private profit motive. But we realize that we must continually seek to improve our business practices to ensure the establishment and continuance of reasonable levels of private profit only, together with scientific progress, individual initiative, equal opportunities for the small businessman and the average worker, fair prices and a decent level of wages, and continuing employment for all of our workers. There is a mysterious cycle in human affairs. To some generations, much is given, and therefore much is expected. This generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. In this world, there are some people who in times past have lived and have fought for freedom, but have now grown weary and too complacent to carry on the fight. So they have traded in their heritage of freedom for the mere illusion of making a good living. They have thereby yielded up our democracy. I sincerely believe in my heart that only by the success of our generation can we once again stir those ancient hopes. Once they realize that we are waging a war against want and destitution and economic demoralization, they will recognize that this is the war for democracy itself, For we are fighting to preserve a great and precious form of government for ourselves and for the world. And physical force by the powerful and wealthy can never permanently withstand the impact of this spiritual force. We have faith that future generations will be taught that here in the middle of our 20th century, there came a time when people of goodwill found a way to unite and to fight to destroy the forces of intolerance, ignorance, slavery, and war. And what we need now, he says, in speaking to you across the time, what we need now is enthusiasm, imagination, and the will to face facts, even if these facts are unpleasant. And we must face them bravely. We need to correct, even if by drastic means, if that becomes necessary, the faults of our present economic system from which we all now suffer. We need the courage of the young. Your task is not the task of learning how to make it in the world as it is now, but instead your task is the remaking of this world, which you now find before you. May each one of you be granted the courage, the faith, and the vision to give the very best that is in you to this remaking of our world. The only truly secure bulwark for continuing liberty is a government that protects the interests of our people, and a people who are strong enough and well enough informed to be able to maintain their sovereign control over our government. And that was his commencement address that he gave at Oglethorpe University on May 22nd of 1932. And he said, "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified fear that paralyzes our needed efforts to convert our present retreat into an aggressive advance." Okay, so what I'm trying to say to you is that you needn't be afraid of recognizing clearly what it is that we're confronting here. Now, I believe we are confronting an amassing of power and wealth on the part of an ever smaller and smaller percentage of people who own the shares of a limited number of major corporations and financial institutions, who are in fact clinging to, in fact have invaded and have occupied the Middle Eastern oil fields in order to maintain a fossil fuel-based economy which is generating billions and billions of dollars more profits to them each year, in that they are doing this at the knowing expense of the entire world, and that they're locked into this appetite that they have for hunger, of power and influence, in that they have distorted the entire decision-making process of our government institutions. In that I believe that they are, in fact, engaged in attempting to set up, through the activities of the Rockefeller Foundation and others of these major families that we'll begin to identify, they're attempting to set up a one-world government, a quasi-government world governing business structure that can and will, if it is not stopped, take over and supersede the authority of the present nation states that have been in existence for 365 years since the Treaty of Westphalia. That there is an effort on the part of this group to set up a world trade organization that will have the kind of a power and authority to set aside the sovereign decision-making of the people of the different nation states. And they can override these decisions by setting up a number of free trade organizations that range from the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, that they have GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. They are now in the process, right at this very minute, of attempting to set up this Trans-Pacific partnership that they're trying to, in the Obama administration, make no mistake about it, in the same way that Bill Clinton is the one that rammed through the North American Free Trade Agreement in the face of the opposition of the progressives of our country, in the labor unions, in the public interest groups, rammed that through Congress. And Obama now, still under the banner of the Democratic Party, is attempting to ram this through in alliance with the reactionaries in the Republican Party. And that there are certain organizations in which you can find these people that we're talking about. You can find these people. They're Republicans and Democrats alike, though it's important to say that they are overwhelmingly within the Republican Party, not in the Democratic Party, that there's a major progressive element inside the Democratic Party represented by the Progressive Caucus inside the United States Congress that has some 65 members in it now. But they also appear and come together in certain places. There are certain institutions and organizations where they come together. And one of them that I'm going to be talking about in the class the next couple days is this one that they were in, as I've mentioned to you before, Brown Brothers Harriman. It's a particular gathering of the rich and powerful that come together and plan and coordinate their activities. And they work with their law firm, which is Sullivan and Cromwell, to basically foist their judgments upon the rest of the world, economic and political. They also appear in certain places so that you can recognize them. That it's not that I'm saying things that you ought not to already know, but the fact is you might not already know these things. And so given the opportunity, the limited opportunity that I have to meet with you in your generation, I want to make sure that I tell you this so that you'll know it. That there are certain organizations in which these people appear over and over again. One of them is the Trilateral Commission, and there's the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations was organized by David Rockefeller, the major potentate, if you will, within the Rockefeller family now, that he in fact set up the Council on Foreign Relations. They have a publication called World Affairs that they publish their magazine repeatedly to coordinate what it is they want to do. You see the head of the Council on Foreign Relations appear regularly on almost all the talk shows, the Sunday morning talk shows. That all you have to, I would recommend that all of you take a look at, just by way of example, call it up on your computers and take a look at the what's his name, the guy that does the global the GPS show on Sunday morning. What's this guy's name? Fareed Zakaria. That's right. Look at Fareed Zakaria's discussion Sunday. And you'll see that he had at his table the executive vice president of the American Enterprise Institute. That is one of the groups that I'm talking about right now. They had people from the Council on Foreign Relations there. They had all of them there. And he led with an editorial bemoaning the demise of the imperial power of the United Kingdom. And how they had graciously brought the benefits of Western civilization to other countries around the world that had been sort of unfairly characterized as colonialism. And that they were bemoaning this fact that the UK is now retiring from the field and is disassembling its major aircraft carriers so that it's unable to project its power around the world. And they were all bemoaning the fact that we aren't building enough aircraft carriers and stuff to project our military power into the Middle East and into the Far East. They're actually suggesting that we have to mobilize further, or otherwise China is going to become, if you can imagine this, the most influential political force in Asia rather than us. And they say it right out loud. So what I'm saying is that you need to be aware of what it is that's happening all around you. You are frogs being cooked in an ever hotter and hotter boiling water here. And this is all becoming tolerated. So that there are groups that you want to look to. There's the American Enterprise Institute, as I said, the Heritage Foundation. You will find them in the Federalist Society. There's a series of these organizations that they've put together to mobilize and to project their interests. That there are certain clubs that you'll hear about. That there is the Skull and Bones Club, which is a very real place where they gather. And they recruit new people to come in and end up marrying them now historically off to their daughters. You know, when they didn't have a young man to ascend to positions of power within their family in their misogynist ways, that they actually found new young entrants people in Yale College as members of the Skull and Bones Club. And then they'd marry them to their daughters and turn over the power to them. There's the Bohemian Grove, where they gather together and party up in Northern California. There are a number of famous dinner clubs where they gather. There's the Metropolitan Club in New York City where they gather. It was started by J.P. Morgan back in 1891. There's the Core Club where it costs $50,000 just to apply to be a member of it. And the average annual income of their members is $13,720,000 a year. Okay? And there are other places of this nature. So it isn't as though these people are invisible. That these people get up and put their pants on one leg at a time every morning. And you can tell who these people are. Tyler, you've been trying to get...
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that it seems like FDR is posing the state and capital interests as opposed to the state is always a limit on capital development. But how would you respond, or how would you respond to the widely held belief by historians that the nation state itself could not have come into development without capitalist modern, without capital industrial infrastructure, and also how would you respond to the critique that restrictions by the state on capital are only there insofar as they function to prevent a collapse of capitalism, and then function to perpetuate capital and don't provide any more than necessary than to prevent the collapse?
Those are all really important insights. They are. The fact is that I believe that it's true, and it's an important recognition that I've come to during the preparing of this second book that I'm working on now. It becomes the hard fact to realize that these people that Roosevelt's talking about here are in fact the people that were the proximate causation of America, North America, to rise to a position of major political power and dominance in the world. It transformed our country from being kind of a rural and eclectic kind of a community around North America into a major industrial power. And it helped generate the major cities, manufacturing centers, et cetera. The question is whether or not you view all of that to be a good thing, or in fact it's of a mixed blessing. That it isn't necessarily in our interest for our country to be a massive military power, to have 500 military bases all around the world, unless you see us as being the beneficiaries of a trickle-down theory of economics. That somehow, if is only 6% of the population of the entire planet, we end up consuming over 50% of all of the raw materials on the planet that are developed every single year into products. You can see that as a benefit. And that's exactly what the challenge is here. If you're inside the beast, just like living in Rome, if you're not in the slave class, but you're in part of the patrician class in Rome, you are receiving the benefits of the empire. And it's very hard for you to perceive that as a major problem. In the fact that you conduct yourself toward your slaves, that you're not mean to them, you don't beat them, you just don't allow them freedom, and they're completely subservient to you. The same thing was true of the barons, in the period of the feudal period in Europe. that the people were basically enslaved. They were indentured servants to the wealthy class. And some of the wealthy class people were probably nice enough to their people, but they still kept them captive. And they still caused the deaths of tens of thousands of people by their conduct and the kind of monies that they extracted from them and shares of their own products. So what I'm saying is that this first point that you make, Tyler, is good. It's true that the United States would never have ascended to the point of being a major, massive military power and economic power in the world, to the point where we would be saying, how can we stand by and allow China to become the most politically influential group in Asia rather than us?
Also that, ultimately the idea of having a nation state, just an entire system of nation states.
The nation states came together in 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia. But the birth of the concept of the nation state was actually formulated at the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And the kind of ruling families of Europe came together and they all sat in council and they said, we've got to establish some kind of finite boundaries and semi-permanent boundaries around our territories so we're not constantly fighting with each other and using up our resources. Since we're all in charge, let's get to an agreement here. Now, the fact is that there wouldn't have been able to have nation states established if it weren't for the fact that there was this royalist elite.
Well, also, when you look at the unification of languages in building nation states are necessitated by the rise of print capitalism.
Well, there's an argument that can be made that the attempt to superimpose a single language inside a given nation state has certain economic purposes, so they can conduct business and negotiations, etc. But what I'm saying is this. Let me move to your second point. The second point is, what about the fact that the nation state, which is being cheered by Roosevelt as being the source of protection against these people, has in fact served as the handmaiden for the rich and powerful, the royalists, the elitists. And there's not any doubt at all that virtually all of the major, what we call public institutions of governance, are established primarily for the benefit of this elite. And what they do is they give the appearance, more or less, to self-governance, or at least some sort of participatory governance. And yet they're designed to enable the elite from the shadows to continue to dominate them and control them. And that is true. So therefore, I am not championing the increasing power of the state as your major defense against these people. What I'm suggesting is that such a group does exist, that there is a self-conscious group of people in any given generation who are historically members of certain families that have historically garnered power and wealth to themselves and have in fact participated in these groups, such as Brown Brothers Harriman, represented by law firms like Sullivan and Cromwell, gathering together to actually plan the takeover of the power of governments. And that is what the group is that we're talking about here. Yes, Sophia?
Okay, I kind of had an off-topic question, but you were talking about the powers that be threatening to collapse the economy if Obama got elected. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I never heard anything about that during the recession era. I suppose I wouldn't, but I'm very curious about that now.
What you need to do is you need to take a look at what the timing on this whole thing was. Is that there was this entire period during which, during the Reagan and Bush era, when in fact there was a whole set of very conscious policy positions were set forth in which they were disassembling a lot of the protections that had been put into place by Franklin Roosevelt during the New Deal. That they had all kinds of restrictions on banks, for example. That banks were not allowed to take the money that people had invested and put it into risky gambling operations. They couldn't buy stock with it, et cetera. And what happened is that the savings and loan corporations had certain restrictions on them as to who they could loan to, what degree of security they needed to be given to back up loans, et cetera. And what happened is all during the Reagan and Bush administrations, they step by step peeled away these particular protections that had been put in place consciously. And they disassembled them, and they basically set loose the hogs at the trough again. And they all began to do exactly what it was that they were doing back in the 1920s. And there was this whole period of increasing monopolization, the constant authorization of more and more conglomerates coming together and buying each other out, et cetera. And the banks got bigger and bigger, and they combined together, et cetera. And so what you saw was a replay of this exact thing happening. And what they did is that one of the things, the one they talk about a lot, was the credit default swaps. That in fact they were extending loans in paper money, printed up by the Federal Reserve, giving out loans to people to secure an interest in their property. To say that you own a house free and clear that's worth $500,000, and they say to you, oh look, we're going to come in and we're going to be willing to give you a loan of $100,000. All you have to do is put up your house as security. And so we'll give you a loan for $100,000. And then what they do is they kind of pressure you. They call you up all the time, and they offer this to you all the time. And then the person goes, okay, I've got a house that's worth $500,000. It's now been appraised at $700,000. So I'll take a loan out on it for $100,000 and do whatever I want with the $100,000 loan. And what happens is that the banks then take that $100,000 loan and they bundle it with 10 other $100,000 loans. So they have $1 million package there. And then what they do is they say, well, look, the likelihood of people defaulting on those loans, they make you pay the interest, every single month on the loan, even to the point where the $100,000 is all paid back, and you still owe them $120,000. Because of the interest that is accrued on the debt. Okay? And then what they do is they take that $100,000 mortgage that's on your house, bundle it with 9 others, and have $1 million package, and they say, okay, the default rate is, say, 6 to 8% on people defaulting on their loans. And so what they do is they offer to sell that package of $1 million at a 10% discount to some other investment group. And what they do is they then sell it to them, and then they get $800,000 back. They get $800,000 back. And what they've done is they have put out paper money. They've got more paper money, but all importantly, they own the land. They have the house. They have the land. What they're doing is they're exchanging printed paper from the Federal Reserve Bank for real property. And they're starting to acquire more and more of that property. And so what happened is they got so much into doing that they ended up selling and reselling these bundled mortgages. And what happened is that whole thing was going, and as long as a government was in power that was going to allow them to continue to do that, whether it was Ronald Reagan or George H. Bush or George H.W. Bush and then George W. Bush, as long as they were in power, they would foster and promote policies that would allow that kind of thing to go on. But what happened, as soon as it became clear to them that in fact Obama was getting the nomination and Obama was getting ready to win, what they did is they said they showed up and they threw down on Congress saying, look, we have gotten so far extended out on all of these credit default swaps that we're like $800 billion in the hole. And that you need to give us $800 billion or else we're going to collapse. Collapse. All their mansions, all their houses, all their yachts, all their Mercedes, they're going to not lose them at all. They're going to keep them. But what they're losing is their paper wealth. And they're going to lose their paper wealth. And so what they do is they throw down on the Congress of the United States, 80% of whom are lawyers, who understand exactly what it is they're saying here. And they say, we want you to take out additional loans of $800 billion from the Federal Reserve Bank. and give them to us. Or else we're going to, quote, fail. We're going to go home. We're going to stop doing this stuff, okay? So what they do is they end up figuring out that what they've done there is they have taken the money away from the Obama administration, figuring out, and I can tell you what I believe they said to themselves, here comes Obama, the first nigger to ever be president of the United States, because make no doubt about what racist pigs these guys are. They're completely racist, these people. And the base of their power is the maintenance of control on behalf of an elite Caucasian male group. It's important to know that. And so they said, here comes this guy. What he's getting ready to do is to take our tax money and give it over to other people like him. He's going to be giving money for them to go to college. He's going to give money to fix their schools in the urban areas. He's going to be giving them welfare. He's going to be giving them health benefits. And so what we do is if we take the $800 billion away from him right at the beginning and turn it over to us, he won't be able to do those things. All you have to do is look at it and say, that things that are done are intended to have certain kind of consequences. But what happened is Obama came in and did both things. That not only did they continue to support W's signing off on the money going to the banks, but that money went to him, and he still continued to demand more money. And what he began to try to do is to cut back on the military spending. To cut back the military spending, and remember, the military spending was being paid out on behalf of invading and occupying the Middle Eastern oil fields. That was exactly what that was. And he started calling to get off oil, to shift over from oil onto alternative energy sources, etc. He was making the right noises, much like Franklin Roosevelt was. And the fact of the matter is, make no doubt about this either, the Democratic Party is into salvaging the capitalist system. They're not trying to replace the capitalist system. They're trying to salvage it. They're trying to keep the capitalists from being so completely over the top that they end up destroying the system, because they end up pigging out constantly and engaging in this excessive profit taking, and therefore the economy will collapse. And so that the Democrats get out in front of this to keep this from happening, okay? And it's important to understand that there are both Democrats and Republicans in this group. But the fact is that they're overwhelmingly Republicans, but the Democratic Party is serving in the behest of these people as well to keep the system going. In supporting their invasions, you saw that the vast majority of people in the Democratic Party voted to give W. Bush the authority to use force to go into the Middle East, and they knew perfectly well that they were in the process of securing control of the oil fields. That's what they were doing. They know exactly what they were doing. And Hillary Clinton voted for it, and John Kerry voted for it, and basically virtually everybody did except Russ Feingold, from Wisconsin. At which point they directed millions of dollars into the campaign to get rid of him. Okay? So you need to understand what it is that's going on. Okay? So the one point I want to make, Thomas, before I want you to be clear in mind that what they have in common, this group, is fascism. That these people are fascists. By fascists, that simply means that they believe in the utilization of the tools of the nation state to garner tax monies from the people and to then subsidize the major corporations. Put money into them for research and development, pay them up front to do that. To give them tax breaks, to subsidize them, basically, and to give them government contracts to build F-15s, to build smart bombs, to build more drones. They've just now announced that, well, they haven't announced it, but the word's gotten out, that they're building a new drone, a new jet-powered drone that can go 450 miles an hour and has a liquid light laser beam on it that can, in fact, basically incinerate things. And so that they're in the process of doing that now. Okay, so what I'm saying is that they have, the idea of fascism is the wedding between the institution of the nation state and corporate capitalism to subsidize the capitalist corporations. Okay, that's what exactly. And the fact of the matter is, the old canard that you always hear is, oh, you aren't saying they're really fascists, are you? Like they're not like Nazis. The fact of the matter is they financed the Nazis. They're the ones that actually put the money out to finance the development of the fascist parties in Europe. All between 1924 and 1934, specifically funding those operations through the Union Bank of New York, the chairman of the board of which was George Herbert Walker, who had been the former CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman. And he got the initial financing for the bank, the Union Bank of New York, from the investment partners of Brown Brothers Harriman, and transferred that money into the Union Bank of New York, set up a subsidiary in the Netherlands called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce. The guy Matthijssen was the head of it for them. And they ended up financing, as I mentioned, the building of the major national headquarters for the fascist party in Germany. And giving loans to them. And the attorney for Brown Brothers Harriman from the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, Allen Dulles, sat in a meeting on January 4th of 1933 with Adolf Hitler, in a meeting specifically signing off on Hitler being made the Chancellor of Germany, on the grounds that Hitler agreed to continue to pay the debts that had been incurred by the reparations that had been imposed upon Germany by the Treaty of Versailles, which reparations provisions were drafted up by Allen Dulles, who was also the lawyer for Germany to negotiate the payment of those reparation payments. This is not rocket science. That all you have to do is look at the history of this and see who these people are. And so what I'm saying is that a fifth premise of the thesis that I'm tendering to you is that this group is identified by their common ideology of fascism. So that every single super wealthy person isn't part of this group. Gates and some of the others that have, and Jeff Kroll and the guys from eBay, they are not invited into this group. This group is a coalition of fascists that have this whole different theory of government in mind and financing. And as I say, this is not just simple greed and avarice. It's not even just simple lust for power on the part of these people. These people are racists, and make no mistake about that. For those of you who are members of the Caucasian race, you need to understand this fundamental flaw that exists inside the Caucasian culture, And the fact of the matter is, virtually all the other people of color of the world know this, except you don't. Okay? And so it's extremely important to understand what it is that's motivating these people, because they believe that their Caucasian race is the elite race of the world, and that in fact they are superior intellectually, that they have this faculty of the intellect developed to a fine-tuned point in making them superior to others. It's a little embarrassing now, the fact that they're all getting blown away by the Japanese and Chinese, but that's why you have to be worried about what's coming down the line. That the Caucasian people are not going to stand for being supplanted by the Chinese. And that's one of the risks that we face in your lifetimes, okay? So that another thing I need to point out is that you need to understand the relationship, and this is going to be an important one, the relationship between this Caucasian, racist, fascist element and the fact that they hide beneath the concept of Christianity. That they've got this whole thing going, that somehow the Roman Catholic Church that was set up in 300 AD to be the national religion of Rome ought to be reestablished. In fact, you should read, If any one of you or more of you ran right out from the class today and got a copy of this book I'm going to tell you about, and you read it, you would jump right down and start typing on your thesis. And that is, it's called The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order by Samuel P. Huntington. Samuel P. Huntington wrote this book right at the end of the Cold War, in which he was openly advocating that what we do is we here in the United States start to eliminate all of this multiculturalism stuff. That we establish English as the one common language for the whole country, and that we establish Christianity, ideally Catholic Christianity, as the common religion. And that we do this in order to gird our collective loins against the onrush of the new Asian empire being led by China. Okay? And that he's flagrant about this. And so you say, well, who the hell is Samuel P. Huntington? Why should I be worried about that? Samuel P. Huntington was the president of the American Academy of Political Science. He was the Olin Professor of International Law at Harvard University. This is a person who was the major advisor to the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay? And it wrote this original article in the World Affairs publication of the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay? This was the open advocacy that they were engaged in to their people, to each other, about how it is they ought to go about doing this thing. Yes, Sophia?
But first of all, don't these people generally hide behind evangelical Protestantism? That's more common. And
Well, Protestantism is Christianity,
yeah,
more or less.
But you said specifically Catholicism,
Yeah.
which I also find kind of strange because I know you work with the Jesuits who are
Yep.
Catholic, and I've seen you espousing Catholic ideas and theological concepts.
Yep.
So
That's all true. That's all true. But the point is that you still need to be on guard. You need to be on guard about this because there is this entire element in the Vatican and in the kind of the major hierarchies of the Catholic Church with which the Jesuits and the progressive elements inside the church, those who are in fact, I might suggest, Christians, are in fact in struggle with those kind of fascistic elements that are inside the Catholic Church. And we'll get into some more detail about this in the next couple of class sections because Pope Pius XII, as I've mentioned to you, signed the Concordat with Mussolini and with the fascists in Spain and in Germany and agreed to acquiesce to their activities, specifically with regard to the Jewish people. And the fact of the matter is that this has been opposed since the very beginning by people like Pedro Rupe, who went on to become the Superior General of the Jesuits and was opposing these people. He openly opposed the fascists, actually got up on the pulpit and started excoriating the fascists in Europe. And they threatened to kill him, to assassinate him. He was eventually chosen, not coincidentally, by the Jesuits to be the Superior General of the Jesuits, to mount this campaign inside the church, which we have now seen come to the beginning of its fruition by the unseating of Ratzinger, the removal of him, and the basically imprisoning of him in this monastery, on the grounds of the Vatican, so that nobody can get at him, in replacing him with Francis, the first Jesuit ever to be a pope in the entire history of the church. And so there is this ascendancy of this other dimension in Catholic Christology. It's certainly not what Samuel Huntington was looking for. He was looking for the other element that he knows is there in that. Okay? And one more point, and it's important to understand, you heard Franklin Roosevelt say back in 1934, if this concentration of financial power and political power continues at the rate at which it's going now, he said, that by the end of the century, that virtually the entire wealth and power of the country will be possessed by the owners of the stock in maybe a dozen of the major corporations, owned by less than 100 men. Okay? And I will cite to you a specific statement that was made. I think I mentioned it to you once just in passing. James Jesus Angleton, who was retained by Allen Dulles, whom I mentioned to you, was the legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, senior partner at the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell. He was the first civilian head of the Central Intelligence Agency, put in place in 1953. And he selected to be the chief of counterintelligence for the CIA, James Jesus Angleton. But he was offered the position on the sole condition that Angleton never employ lie detector tests or do any investigations of Allen Dulles himself or the 60 men with whom he collectively funded the rise of Germany between World War I and World War II. And that he was specifically forbidden to engage in investigating these 60 men. So our chief assignment is to figure out who those 60 men were and who the replacement 60 men are now that are functioning in their shoes. Because this has been going on consistently down through time, from Alexander Hamilton and Adams and the people that were advocating the central bank and the mercantilists that were part of that clique, all the way up and through, including this group that was in Brown Brothers Harriman with lawyering by Sullivan and Cromwell. And there's a book, another book that you could read, and it would set you a glimmering, and that is Sullivan and Cromwell, A Law Unto Itself. Isn't that the name of the book? I think that's the name. It's like Sullivan and Cromwell, A Law Unto Itself. And it shows the history of the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell and what they were created to do. They're not just there to do business. They're not just there to be lawyers for people. They're there to help the ruling elite take over the resources of the world and figuring out how to do it. And they were the champions of these major transnational corporations. Yes, Thomas.
So what I wanted to ask was, I imagine first of all it came to you as no surprise when after the subprime mortgage lending and toxic assets in 2008 caused this collapse in the economic structure, and then Obama was forced to basically bail out the banks. That one of the first things that he did as president, which was a slight surprise to me, was to ramp up the funding for the NSA and the Central Security Administration or Service,
Mm-hmm.
and ramp up the funding and abilities for them to support the national security state, and then pass the National Defense Authorization Act.
Yeah.
I imagine you would say there's probably a connection between the transnational corporations and the defense that they want through the government, and the reason why Obama perhaps increased funding for those organizations, which he specifically said he wasn't going to do, he was going to reduce funding when he was campaigning to be president.
You're right, I wasn't surprised. Next. But no, you're right. I won't be. I'm being facetious. Yeah, no. The reality of it is that when one of the things about Obama when he came in is that it was one of those kind of peculiar events in political history where the kind of enthusiasm on behalf of so many of the people ourselves led us into selecting a person who had not been thoroughly vetted by them. He had not been thoroughly vetted by them. And so that when he came in, he was able to, in some good faith, make all of these kind of statements about what any kind of person of adequate moral fiber would probably say, and get to be elected. And then when he got in there, all these people come around and start laying it on to him as to what's really going on in the world and what the real ball game is here. And what he did is he gradually became more and more acclimated to that. And so that he ends up being supportive of that. I mean, his whole world is encircled by these people. The CIA people and the Pentagon people and all of these folks. And he kept on a certain number of other people to be advisors for him in the national security area to maintain continuity. And they, to no one's surprise, just kept on advocating the same things. And so that he is basically coming to see what sense that makes. And he's even now being castigated for his having withdrawn the troops from Iraq, which is one of his major campaign promises in 2004. It was one of the major reasons he got elected. And he actually took the steps of trying to withdraw them. He hasn't withdrawn all of them. He left people in to, quote, train them and to fight under a certain emergency situation. But the bottom line is that these people run away the minute that ISIS comes into sight. And because there is no such thing as the nation state there. There's no such thing as the Iraqi nation state that they're all feeling terrible loyalties for. It's just a superimposition upon basic tribal areas on the part of the Western Allied powers at the end of World War I in that Churchill committee I told you about. So it's not surprising. But the question is, as you need to understand more details of who they are in order to know what to do about this. Because I don't want to just set forth this thesis to you to have you, be prepared to jump out of a first-story window, when we get done here and go, what are we going to do about this? I'm going to tell you what we can do about this. Seth, you had a question?
Yeah, wouldn't Obama have some kind of idea of this secret component of our American political system just rising through the ranks of his presidential campaign and, just wanting presidential aspirations? Don't you have to have some slight idea of that kind of stuff? Like it couldn't be just some huge bombshell from Obama.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it didn't come to him as a complete and total surprise. It's just that I think he thought that he was capable, of negotiating that stuff. He is completely convinced that he can negotiate anything, that he can get everybody to yes, that he can get everybody in a room together. You saw this at the beginning. We can get everybody in the room together, and assuming everyone's good faith, we can all figure out what everybody wants, and everybody can get most of what it is they want. And I can do that for you. I can handle this. Well, he couldn't. The fact is they just dug their heels right in. They used the Tea Party people as their stalking horse. The Koch brothers, the Koch brothers just poured money onto them and paid for their little signs and buses and freaked everybody out. And he wasn't able to hold against them. So he folded one step at a time, and that's what's happened to him. But what I want to do is I want to be answering our questions now, and I'm going to continue on Thursday giving you more details about exactly who these people are, what the things are they have done, and so that, because I think it's important as a matter of the thesis to get you to firmly understand that this is true, and this isn't some kind of harebrained perception on my part, because this has been known for some time. The question is what to do about it, how to fix this, how to solve this, and to determine whether or not this particular constitutional system is salvageable, in the midst of all of this. Yes.
That he's like somewhat of like a blue rhino or whatever, but because he left the campaign trail for the bailout, right? So was he like standing up to that threat then?
No, it was just an absolute simple opportunistic effort on his part. He came rushing into Washington here. I'm here to save the day, and he didn't know shit about what to do. And he showed up there, and everybody turned to him, and he didn't have anything to say. It was one of the all-time political fiascos. That somebody inside his advisory group advised him to do that, and he went and did it, and didn't know what to say once he got there. It was a total disaster, And just like he went ahead and picked Joe Lieberman. He picked Joe Lieberman for his vice president, and then when they confronted him about it, he folded, and ended up picking Sarah Palin. Because of this guy, Robert McConnell, or Michael McConnell out of Ohio that was getting ready to blackmail them because of his having rigged the machines for them. And he just folded. He doesn't have the kind of political fiber to stand up, against that stuff.
McCain rigged voting machines?
No, McCain did not rig the voting machines. That Michael McConnell rigged the voting machines. But I'll talk about that more tomorrow. Okay, yes, Sarah.
Or it might be red dog. Dark horse? Blue rhino, I was told it means like, or a Republican that's too moderate for the Republican Party.
Okay?
So like John McCain, because like his wife's like pro-gay marriage and stuff, like Republicans have like,
Yeah.
they're like.
Yeah, they're blue because blue is the color of the left wing, and rhino stands for Republican in name only, and it's a pun on Blue Rhino, which is that company that sells propane for camping.
There you go. Okay? Thank you, Sophia. Yes, Tyler.
So earlier you connected the left and right party in American politics.
Oh, I did what?
The left and right parties, like Democrat and Republican.
No. I don't characterize the Democrats as a left party. You know, that they're a conservative party, and the Republicans are a reactionary party.
So you characterize both of these two parties that, I mean, ultimately represent in our political spectrum, like, or at least what's viable to us, left and right. You like connected them to capitalistic accumulation through the ideology of fascism.
No. What I said is that there are some people who are part of this elite group we're talking about who profess to be Democrats. You get guys like Averell Harriman and some others like that. But the overwhelming percentage of them are Republicans, only because, I mean, they'd be fascists if they were a fascist party. They'd be reactionaries if they were a reactionary party. But given the fact that the Republican Party encloses conservatives, reactionaries, and et cetera, they're in that party. But there are some Democrats. What I'm saying is the Democratic Party exists as a safety valve for protecting the system. And the system entails capitalism at the present time. But there are elements inside the Democratic Party that are social democrats. And some of them that are even socialists. You know, for example, Bernie Sanders. You know, so they entail a certain spectrum of that.
I mean, like, but you argue that, like, the DNC is still, like, protecting capitalists.
Oh, yes.
Interests. So, I mean, and you said that ultimately the ideology that they share, which adds to them protecting capital interests, is fascism?
No. What I said is that this group, this elite that we're talking about,
Yes.
let's be really clear about this. I'm talking about a certain elite that they're talking about that are less than 100 men that are part of this kind of elite group, and they coordinate together and they work together, et cetera. You know, the Democratic Party has tens of thousands of people in it and huge spreads. The Republican Party has huge spreads. These people are not synonymous with the Republican Party, is all I'm saying. There are some members of the Democratic Party that are part of that, like Averell Harriman, who is the son of E.H. Harriman, the railroad baron. Yes?
Yeah, so I mean, my question is just that, like, couldn't this alliance of elites also be characterized not by their shared ideology of fascism, but by their shared ideology of classical liberalism?
No.
See,
Not even close.
That argument is very, very well made in multiple places regarding neoliberalism,
Yes?
which
Neoliberalism, yes.
justify.
But that's just a misnomer. Neoliberalism, that's like calling the people neocons or neoconservatives. They're total reactionaries. They just don't want to use the word. They don't want to use the word reactionaries.
On the extension of universal human rights. and
Pardon?
They're ultimately still basing their justification for capital accumulation on the extension of universal human rights, specifically the right to pursue.
Yeah, belong to them. The right to get rich. Yeah, right.
So I mean, like, don't you think that also underlies like both the political belief systems of both major parties?
No, maybe because I don't think they really believe that at all. They don't give a shit about human rights, as displayed by their conduct. You know, not only in their personal lives, but in their collective policy lives. They don't believe in that for a minute. But they realize that the major public governing structures require them to pay lip service to that kind of thing. They weren't going into the Middle East to try to, as I've said many times, to help women learn how to drive.
I just think
You know?
there's like a very clear connection between saying that individuals that the proper government is set up around individuals pursuing their individual rights to happiness, and that becomes a exchange for capitalists.
Well, I know, but if you think that an integral aspect of your pursuit of happiness is to become rich and powerful and to take over the government and crush everybody else who's opposing you, so you're not happy.
It just separates two individuals whose only interaction is one of reciprocal exchange, which functions as a model of capitalism.
Well, but if you agree with that plank that I've referred to you a couple times, in the Libertarian Party that in fact they agree with doing away with corporations. If you do away with corporations, I'm not that concerned about just individuals without that kind of special power given to them by the state of being able to really wreak that much havoc. You know, that we can through proper procedures can constrain their.
So the problem is not like the actual system, the capitalist system of exchange or production.
No, free enterprise is not the problem. Corporate capitalism is the problem.
So it's just who has accumulated money, not how money is accumulated.
No, it's what I'm saying is that if you have a corporation which is a creation of the state itself, giving special privileges to individuals to be able to pool their money together and run a business and remain completely immunized against any personal liability, and that their management is completely immunized, and they don't have to pay taxes on the money except at a much reduced rate, and they get all kinds of subsidies from the government for industrial creativity and research and development.
There's like no connection between like our individual rights and our individual rights to property.
No, it's not saying that. It's not saying that. But there's a whole libertarian progressive discussion that needs to go on here, and it's an important one. And I've spent a lot of time having that conversation with people, for example, the people in Thrive, that movie that you may have seen called Thrive, that talks all about the people being able to thrive and everybody can profit together and everybody can be happy on it. You know, the folks that are behind that thing, some of them are self-conscious libertarians. We've had very specific discussions. But I appreciate the questions from that perspective because they're legitimate and important.
I don't think that comes from a libertarian perspective at all. I think that's a very, very heavily, constructionalist perspective to a certain degree, but like libertarian perspective.
Okay, but does Sarah?
I think just in respect to like the corporations, this just suggests like you can't limit someone's right because it's their right to accumulate more wealth. But just with respect to the specific like modern corporations, any law can probably be proven that by acquiring your wealth, you're limiting someone else's personal liberties. Okay, when you poison this stream, I just put this entire village in danger and I take away your property. Like pretty much any like law that could be passed today to restrict them, or most of the ones that people are going to be advocating for, could be proven that you're limiting someone else's liberties. So I think like just practically and realistically, like you could use constitutional law and like the belief of like not limiting someone's property.
The main thing that I'm really getting at is kind of the idea that corporations do represent a highly industrialized form of capitalism, but are ultimately still routable to the same system of exchange, which is
But
presumed
why?
to be on a
Because a
one-to-one
corporation
basis.
is not.
Well, but
Person.
Sarah, but see, the same thing could be said about not imposing any particular constraint upon them being able to engage in kind of marketing which is completely deceptive because it's free speech.
It's very much the idea of making a contract. Like, and we read it in even like a social contract. The idea of reciprocally, which is exchange, ignores the production of a commodity. And by ignoring the production of a commodity, in just narrowing the perspective to a system of exchange, we completely ignore the value that labor adds into a commodity. And by doing so, we ignore the characteristic that adds to capitalism or accumulation.
Well, okay, I hear what you're saying. This is more of that same conversation, an important conversation. Yes, Thomas.
I don't want to take up too many people's time.
All right, and we go to someone else then. All right, who else? No, you can take it. We're almost out of time, but you
So I
can.
think that Sarah's response to what Tyler was saying is interesting, but it makes me sort of think about some rights as being more important to Trump than other rights, because if you look at natural law, Locke's version, life, liberty, and property, versus the one in the Constitution, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, you could easily argue that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is more important than property, because that was the one that was adopted with that deep personal ability, the right to live. In underdeveloped communities or ethnic minorities or citizens who do not have as much wealth and property is a more important right, I imagine you could argue, than the right to acquire property and wealth, which is still defined under the Constitution. I don't know if that's an argument
Well-
that would be made legally in court, but
Well, the thing is that one has to be careful about setting up kind of antipodal concepts that aren't necessarily so. You know, and this whole effort on the part of the Roosevelt administration to crush the Supreme Court in going down the exact line you're talking about, Tyler, that exact line was what the Supreme Court was pursuing in all of those cases where they said that this is interfering, you know, trying to set up regulations on the major business corporations is interfering with their right to contract, and it's attacking their right to property. And there was a whole long series of questions there that are meritorious and need to be looked at, but that is a major central issue of debate and discussion still inside the constitutional law community about how is it that one can differentiate those rights from other rights. You know, and they just set up this thing as there's commercial speech and commercial activity, and that's just not protected. You know, I've never found that completely convincing, but there's a lot more to be said about that. Okay, look, so there we are. There's more to be said about this, and more to be said about what could be done about this, and we'll take that discussion up on Thursday. But you know what your thesis is, so let's get started on it, okay?